Letter found in a jar. If you are holding this page, then the tide did what I could not. It carried my words past the fences. My name is Inez Calder. I am writing from a place that does not appear on maps, though it appears on receipts, on shipping manifests, and in the pauses people make when they pretend not to know. I am not asking you to rescue me. I am asking you to believe me long enough to become dangerous to the people who count on your disbelief. I will start with the ordinary lie, because that is how all disasters begin. Our island called itself a sanctuary. It was named St. Leora, which sounded like a hymn and smelled like sunscreen. The brochures promised quiet beaches and a new marine research institute. They used words like restoration and resilience and community partnership. They showed smiling teenagers collecting seagrass samples and scientists in wide-brim hats pointing at dolphins. I saw the brochure once in an airport kiosk, and I laughed, because the photo was of our pier, and I could see, in the corner of the frame, the yellow buoy that marked the restricted water. No brochure mentions a buoy like that. I came to St. Leora as a contract diver, the kind of person you call when you want the work done quietly and quickly. I was 28, recently divorced, and tired of cities that felt like rooms without windows. I had grown up on boats. My father welded hulls, my mother fixed engines, and the ocean raised me with a harsher affection than any human could manage. I knew how to measure risk with my body, the pressure in your ears, the way your breath speeds up when your instincts see a current before your eyes do. I also knew something else, the thing that makes people like me useful. I knew how to keep secrets, not because I liked them, but because secrets paid. Then my father died, and the secrets stopped being theoretical. He died in a yard accident that was called an accident. A chain snapped. A beam fell. A man who had survived hurricanes got crushed by a piece of steel in broad daylight. When the company offered compensation, they also offered silence. My mother took the money because rent does not wait for justice. I took the silence because I did not know how to fight what I could not name. That was my first mistake. The job offer for St. Leora came 3 months later from a company called Meridian Blue. They claimed they needed divers to inspect foundation pylons for the new institute. The pay was obscene. The contract was clean. The non-disclosure clause was thick. I should have walked away. Instead, I signed, because my mother needed her medications and my sister needed tuition and my own shame needed a distraction. I flew to the island on a small seaplane that circled once before landing. From above, St. Leora looked like a green coin dropped in blue velvet. I noticed 2 things that did not belong to a sanctuary: a high radio tower on the northern ridge and a second pier that was not on the brochure. The pilot did not answer when I asked about it. He just said, "Do not swim past the buoy." At the dock, the institute director greeted me. His name was Dr. Rowan Hale, and he had the posture of someone who had never waited for permission. He shook my hand with the practiced warmth of a man who understood optics. Behind him stood a young woman with a tablet, eyes calm, hair braided tight, name tag reading, Neela. She watched me the way a nurse watches a patient before delivering a needle, politely, efficiently, and without hesitation. Dr. Hale gave me a tour of the institute, which was still half under construction. There were tanks and labs and posters about coral bleaching, all the right props. There were also doors marked authorized personnel only, and hallways that turned too sharply, as if meant to confuse. That night, in the staff housing, I found a welcome kit, sunscreen, a water bottle, and a thin phone without internet access. A note on top said, "For your safety, use this device only. No one in a real sanctuary hands you a controlled phone." I told myself I was being paranoid, the way people do when they do not want to admit they are being managed. My first dive was routine. I went down along a pylon, checked for cracks, reported mild corrosion. The water was clear, the current gentle, and I could almost believe I was lucky. Then, at 12 meters, I saw something that made my lungs forget their rhythm. A net, not a fishing net. A fine, almost invisible mesh stretched between pylons, anchored to the seafloor like a cage. Inside the mesh were metal crates with thick seals and serial numbers. I swam closer and touched one. It vibrated faintly, like something alive. My dive computer beeped a warning about electromagnetic interference. I pulled back, heart hammering, and looked up. Above me, sunlight rippled like a lie. Back on land, I reported the mesh to Dr. Hale, keeping my voice casual. He smiled and said, "Ah, our experimental containment. You do not need to worry about that." Neela's eyes did not move. 2 days later, I met the teenagers from the brochure. They were real. They wore institute shirts and carried buckets, and laughed too loudly, as if the laughter had been rehearsed. Their chaperone, a teacher named Mr. Voss, smiled at me and asked if I liked the island. I said, "It is beautiful." He said, "Beauty is a kind of permission." It was a strange thing to say, and he said it like a line. Among the teenagers was a girl with sunburnt shoulders and an anxious face. She hung back from the others and watched the sea as if it might answer her. Her name was Lark. She asked me softly, "Do you dive under the buoy?" I hesitated. "I am not supposed to," I said. Lark nodded like she had expected that. Then she whispered, fast, as if the words would bruise her if she held them too long. "My brother went under it. He did not come back the same." Before I could ask more, Mr. Voss called her name sharply, and she flinched. She rejoined the group, smile pasted on. I stood there with salt drying on my lips and realized the island had a script, and everyone was performing. I started paying attention to the small rules. No one swam at night. The northern ridge was off limits, supposedly because of nesting birds. Supply boats arrived on Tuesdays, always after midnight. The staff housing had cameras in the hallways, disguised as smoke detectors. Neela carried keys on a chain that never left her belt. Even at dinner, Dr. Hale spoke about the mission the way priests talk about salvation, with certainty and a hint of impatience toward anyone who asked how. When I asked where the Institute's funding came from, he said, "From people who want the ocean to stay useful." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. He did not laugh back. On my 4th dive, the current changed without warning. It pulled hard toward the restricted buoy, as if something had opened a drain. I fought it, finning sideways, and my tank scraped a pylon. A new sound filled the water, a low hum that vibrated through my bones. My dive computer glitched. Then, through the blue, I saw a shadow move where no large animal should be. It was too angular to be a shark, too smooth to be a boat. It passed beneath the mesh cage and disappeared into the dark. I surfaced, shaking. Dr. Hale met me at the dock, face calm. "Rough current?" he asked. I stared at him. "What is under there?" I demanded. He placed a hand on my shoulder like a friend. His grip was firm. "Inez," he said quietly, "the ocean is full of things you do not understand. It is better for your mental health if you focus on the pylons." He said mental health the way you say containment. I tried to leave. It is embarrassing how quickly a confident person turns into a frightened one when she realizes her exits are decorative. I went to the airstrip at dawn and told the mechanic I needed the next flight out. He looked at my controlled phone, then looked away. "No flights today," he said. I pointed at the schedule. "There is one at noon." He shrugged. "Weather." The sky was clear. I went to the pier and asked a boat captain to take me to the mainland. He shook his head violently. "Cannot," he said. "They will revoke my license." I offered cash. He flinched, as if I had offered poison. I returned to the Institute and confronted Neela, because she seemed like the person who actually ran the locks. She listened, expression unreadable, and said, "You can leave when your contract ends." "My contract ends in 6 weeks," I said. Neela gave a short nod. "Then, in 6 weeks, you can leave." Her calm made my anger burn hotter. "What if I leave now?" I said. Neela looked at me for a long beat. Then she said, softly, "Then you become part of the reef." I laughed once, sharp. "Is that a threat?" Neela's eyes flicked toward the water. "It is a prediction," she said. I stopped trying to run. Running was a scene the island was prepared for. Instead, I did the opposite. I stayed, and I watched, and I collected. I found a storage room with a maintenance logbook. Inside were handwritten entries about power usage spikes at night. I found a roster of teenagers with volunteer hours that did not match their school schedules. I found a chart in Dr. Hale's office labeled Teed Ledger, tracking shipments in kilograms and something else in units that were not explained. The numbers repeated in patterns. The ledger looked less like research and more like inventory. I took photos with my own hidden phone, the one I had smuggled in and kept wrapped in plastic like a contraband organ. I began sending messages to my friend on the mainland, a journalist named Tamsin Co. But the island blocked most signals. Only sometimes, in the middle of the night, if I stood near the northern ridge, a message would slip through like a fish. That is why I'm writing this letter in a jar. Paper can drift where signals cannot. One evening, Lark slipped into the dive shed while I was repairing my gear. She closed the door behind her and stood with her back against it, breathing hard. "They said you were asking questions," she whispered. I kept my voice low. "Who is they?" I asked. Lark swallowed. "Mr. Voss. Dr. Hale. The tower people." "Tower people?" I repeated. She nodded rapidly. "The ones who watch the screens. My brother said the tower is not for radio. It is for counting." "Counting what?" I asked. Lark's eyes filled. "Us," she whispered. "They count us like birds." I felt cold spread through me. "Where is your brother now?" I asked. Lark flinched. "He is here," she said. "In the institute. But he does not know me. He looks through me. Sometimes he hums like the water." My stomach turned. "What did he do under the buoy?" I asked. Lark wiped her face angrily. "He swam through the mesh," she whispered. "He said there were crates. He said there was something inside that made him feel full of other people's thoughts." That sentence made my skin prickle. "Thoughts?" I asked. Lark nodded. "He called it the choir," she whispered. "He said it was like hearing 100 voices try to become one." I stared at the sea beyond the shed door and remembered the hum underwater. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. Lark's chin trembled. "Because you are not from here," she said. "And because you look like someone who leaves and comes back. Maybe you can take me with you." I wanted to promise. I did not. Promises are the easiest way to get killed on an island that feeds on hope. Instead, I said, "If we do this, we do it with a plan. No hero scenes. You understand?" Lark nodded fiercely. "Yes," she whispered. "Boring. Quiet. Please." Our plan began with the most unromantic weapon on Earth, a schedule. We mapped the guards' rotations, the supply boat arrivals, the tower maintenance times. We learned that on Tuesdays at 2:10 a.m., the generator cycled, and the cameras in the southern hallway blinked off for exactly 90 seconds. We learned that Nyla took her break at midnight, sitting alone by the pier, staring at the buoy like it was a confession. We learned that Mr. Voss drank in his office after curfew and called someone on a secure line, laughing at jokes we could not hear. Most importantly, we learned that the crates under the mesh were moved once a month, pulled up by a winch on the second pier, and loaded onto a black barge. The next barge was in 8 days. If those crates contained whatever Lark called the choir, that was our deadline. Not for escape alone, but for stopping the export of a thing that turned teenagers into empty humming shells. I had no idea what it was scientifically. I did not need a full explanation to know it was wrong. On the 7th night, I followed Nyla to the pier during her break. The moon was thin, and the water looked like ink. Nyla stood at the edge, hands in her pockets, shoulders rigid. I approached slowly. "Nyla," I said quietly. She did not turn. "You are not supposed to be out," she said. "Neither are you," I replied. A pause. Then she sighed. "Rules are for the counted," she said. "Who counts you?" I asked. Nyla's jaw tightened. "Dr. Hale thinks he does," she said. "He thinks he owns the mission." "He does not. He is a manager. Managers never understand what they manage." My heart thumped. "So there is someone above him," I said. Nyla finally looked at me. "Above, below, around," she said. "Meridian Blue is a front. The Institute is a shell. The real project is the tower and the mesh. They call it the orchard." "What is it harvesting?" I asked. Nyla's throat worked. "Signal," she said. "Not radio, not Wi-Fi. Human signal. The pattern of choice." I stared. "That does not make sense," I said. Nyla gave a humorless smile. "It does not have to make sense to you. It has to make profit for them." "How do you harvest choice?" I asked. Nyla looked at the buoy. "You trap people where their choices are limited. You scare them, reward them, punish them, measure the outputs. You find the predictable ones. You buy them. You find the unpredictable ones. You break them. You store the data." My mouth went dry. "The crates," I whispered. Nyla nodded. "The choir is a compression, a way to hold 1,000 decision patterns in one container. They can sell it to governments, to advertisers, to anyone who wants to steer crowds without visible hands." I felt nausea rise. "And the teenagers?" I asked. Nyla's eyes flickered. "Training sets. Local kids are cheap. A sanctuary makes people trust." Anger surged. "Why are you helping them?" I demanded. Nyla flinched. Then she exhaled. Because I signed a contract the way you did. Because my brother needed surgery. Because I thought I could endure. Because I thought I could be useful and then leave. Then I watched Lark's brother come back humming. And I realized endurance is just slow collaboration. I swallowed. Then help us stop it, I said. Neela laughed softly. Stop it. You sound like a person who still believes in stopping things. Do you? I asked. Neela stared at the dark water. I believe in leakage. Systems rarely collapse from confrontation. They collapse from information escaping. I held up my hidden phone. Then leak with us, I said. Nyla looked at the phone, then at me. If I do, they will bury me, she whispered. If you do not, they will bury kids, I said. A long pause. Then Neela nodded once. 8 days. We get the ledger, the tower logs, and proof from the mesh. After that, we run. The next 8 days were the longest of my life. We moved like ghosts through routine. Lark acted normal at the institute, smiled at Mr. Voss, took selfies near the tanks like the brochure demanded. Neela continued to hand Dr. Hale his coffee and nod at his speeches. I kept diving and reporting corrosion, while my hidden phone filled with evidence. At night, we met in the dive shed and compared notes. We found that the tide ledger was synced to a server in the tower every midnight. We found the tower maintenance hatch, and a box of keycards labeled with names of people who no longer lived on the island. We found a tiny vial labeled Choyer Sample Do Not Open. I did not open it. Then, 2 nights before the barge, Lark came to me trembling. They took my brother to the pier. They said he has to swim under the buoy again. They said it is time to refresh him. Refresh, like data. Neela's face went hard. They suspect. They move when they suspect. Our plan broke. We had to write a new one in real time. The principle remained, no one goes alone. So we went together. At 11:40 p.m., we moved toward the second pier. Near the pier, we heard voices. Dr. Hale and Mr. Voss and 2 guards stood with Ash, who looked blank and pale, swaying, humming. Doctor, Hale spoke gently. This will be easy. Just a swim. We are helping you stay calibrated. Ash nodded without understanding. Neela whispered. We do not fight them. We change the environment. She stepped into the pier light and called, Dr. Hale, the tower server is throwing errors. We need the ledger sync now or the barge schedule will misalign. The word meridian changed the air. Dr. Hale relented and walked off with Neela. Mr. Voss guided Ash toward a small boat. That was our window. I stepped into the light and lied my way into the boat. Lark followed, loud with fear. The generator cycled early. Neela triggered the blackout. In the darkness, I knocked Mr. Voss into the water. A guard grabbed me. I bit him and ran. We sprinted to the maintenance gate as a gunshot cracked the air. Ash flinched and, for the first time, looked at Lark and whispered her name. Neela locked the gate and hissed, Tower, now. Inside the tower, screens glowed with the Orcard area label and the live map of the mesh cage. We copied the ledger and the logs. Doctor, Hale reached the hatch and tried persuasion, then threat. We ignored him. When the copy completed, we ran to the maintenance platform and used the emergency descent cable. Lark went first, then me with the drive, then Ash. I looked back and saw Neela punch Dr. Hale in the throat before he could grab her. We ran for my room, tried for signal, found none, and did the only thing left. We used the ocean. We sealed the drive into a waterproof bag, wrapped this letter around it, and put it in a glass jar. We threw it into the outgoing current beyond the buoy. That is where the story should have ended if all I wanted was survival. But survival is not enough when the machine stays alive. What happened after the jar? I am adding this because you asked for a full story, not just a cliff. If you have the jar, you have evidence, but evidence is only half the job. The other half is what I call turning proof into pressure. It is not glamorous, it is redundancy. It is making the same truth appear in many places, so no single hand can erase it. In my imagination, my friend Tamsin Co. receives the first copy and reacts the way good reporters react. She does not panic. She verifies. She checks metadata. She cross-references server addresses. She compares the tide ledger to port logs and charter flight schedules. She follows Meridian Blue to a trust, to a security firm, to a rehabilitation facility. She calls the project what it is in language the law can recognize. Unlawful restraint, fraud, environmental crimes, and human experimentation on minors. Then she does the most dangerous thing to a silent system. She distributes the story to multiple organizations at once. She sends copies to other newsrooms, legal clinics, watchdog groups, and government offices that hate embarrassment. When enough people hold the same secret, it stops being leverage and becomes liability. Meridian Blue responds the way sanitized monsters respond. Deny, distract, then offer a reform committee. They claim the files are fake. They claim the Institute saves coral. They release glossy footage of smiling teens and accuse critics of hating science. They hire experts to say, choice patterns are nonsense. They blame weather, because weather cannot testify. But denial gets expensive when numbers match reality. That is why you must make the numbers match. Track the black barge. Photograph it. File information requests. Compare its arrivals to generator cycles. Ask why a sanctuary needs midnight shipping. Ask why miners are present near restricted water. Ask why private security controls public seas. Ask these questions publicly, in writing, where they can be cited. 100 small questions create a weight a single scream cannot. If the orchard is smart, it will try to move evidence. That is why you do not wait for the perfect story. Release partials early. Release enough that the orchard cannot pretend nothing is happening. The goal is friction. Every hour they spend covering is an hour they cannot harvest. Systems like this do not collapse because of one spectacular raid. They collapse because covering costs more than confessing. The first public crack will come from boring places. An inspection, a subpoena, a school attendance audit, a fisherman posting a recording of the underwater hum, a clinician asking why a teenager returned from volunteering with flat affect and involuntary humming. The orchard hates boring seams. It thrives on spectacular fights it can frame as hysteria. It cannot easily survive procedure. I need you to understand retaliation. They will dox you. They will sue you for defamation. They will call you unstable. They will offer you money to stop. They will offer you a job to absorb you. They will threaten your family. That is why my first instruction is always the same. Do not be alone. Make yourself a crowd. Crowds are harder to crush quietly. If you are reading this alone, recruit. You do not need brave friends. You need reliable ones. You need people who answer texts. You need people who keep receipts. Receipts are the language of power. Now the human part. What happens to Lark and Ash and Neela and me? When pressure becomes public, the orchard will try to move its assets. That includes people. They will relocate teens under the pretense of educational programs. They will separate siblings. They will transfer staff to other facilities. Your job is to make relocation hard. Publish rosters. Ask where minors are. Demand accountability for travel permissions. Visibility is poison to a system that relies on anonymity. Also be gentle with survivors. The hum, the choir, does not just scare you. It narrows your imagination until you believe there are only two options: comply or disappear. That is how few guards can control many bodies. If you meet someone who seems blank or unable to decide, do not call them stupid. They are compressed. They are full of other people's noise. Give them simple choices and time. Let them relearn their own voice. That is the opposite of harvest. If you want an ending, I will give you one that is honest about uncertainty, but complete in meaning. After the jar left our hands, the island tightened. Doctor, Hale confiscated controlled phones and replaced them with newer ones that were even more locked. He announced a security upgrade due to external misinformation and put the island on lockdown. That reaction told me the jar mattered. Systems do not lock down for nothing. They lock down for missing pieces. In the days that followed, we hid in crawl spaces and maintenance tunnels. We moved at odd hours. Ash grew clearer in small bursts, like a radio finding its station. Lark learned to speak without whispering. We watched for Neela. Sometimes we saw her shadow near the tower. Sometimes we found tiny signs of her sabotage. A missing keycard, a camera that blinked wrong, a door that was suddenly unlocked. Once we found a note tucked under the dive shed door. Keep the drive safe. Do not come for me. She signed it with a small triangle like a direction arrow. I cried into my sleeve and then wiped my face and kept moving, because grief can be used as a leash if you let it stop you. The night the black barge finally arrived early, the water near the buoy churned like something breathing. Men in dark rain gear moved crates from the mesh with practiced speed. The hum rose until my teeth vibrated. Ash clutched his head and whispered, "They are counting." We watched from the ridge. helpless in the short term and dangerous in the long term, because helplessness is temporary when evidence escapes. I realized then the ocean was both prison and courier. The orchard had built hardware to control it, but the ocean still carried my jar away. That is the one force they cannot fully contract. Storms mix things. Currents leak. Glass drifts. That is why I chose a jar instead of a server. Hardware can be seized. The tide is harder to subpoena. So, Finder, here is my final request. Do not let St. Leora become a rumor. Rumors are safe for villains. Turn it into a docket. Turn it into a hearing. Turn it into an expense. Turn it into a sentence someone has to read out loud in court. If you make them spend money on defense, you slow the harvest. If you make them answer questions, you widen the world for the counted. And if you can, reach my mother. Her name is Marisol Calder. She lives in a trailer near the shipyard and pretends loneliness is a choice because hope is expensive. Tell her I did not vanish because I did not love her. Tell her silence is not safety. It is only delay. Tell her to keep every receipt and to stop apologizing for being angry. Accurate anger is a compass. The only thing the orchard cannot harvest is a choice made in full awareness. Make yourself expensive. Make St. Leora expensive to operate. That is how you break a harvest. Signed, Inez Calder. Addendum from the Finder. I am not Inez. My name is Jonah Mercer, and I found the jar on a winter morning when the sea had peeled the beach open like an old scar. I almost tossed it back, because it looked like somebody's art project, but the weight inside was wrong, too deliberate. The letter was damp at the edges, but readable. The drive was wrapped in a double-sealed bag that smelled faintly of diesel. I took it home and stared at it for an hour like it might bite. Then I did what Inez asked. The boring thing. I made 3 copies before I opened a single file, because my friend who works in IT once told me the first rule of proof is that proof loves to vanish. The files were real in the way only real crimes are. Meticulous, redundant, corporate. The ledger had dates, weights, routes, and notes about compliance variants. There were camera stills from hallways, time-stamped. There were contracts with vague names and sharp penalties. There were audio clips labeled hum test. I listened to one and felt my stomach clench, because even through laptop speakers, the sound made my thoughts feel slightly out of step. I stopped listening. I did not need to understand the hum to understand the intent. I contacted Tams & Co. the way people contact strangers when they have no better options, with a message that tries to be calm while failing. I wrote, I found something. It involves miners and an island and a company called Meridian Blue. I have files. I do not want money. I want you to tell me what to do. She replied within 11 minutes. Do not upload anything to cloud services. Do not call the island. Do not tell anyone who might try to be a hero. Bring the drive to this address. Bring a friend. Bring nothing else. That last instruction sounded paranoid until I read Inez's letter again and realized paranoia is sometimes just accurate imagination. Tamsin met me in a laundromat parking lot because journalists, like spies, understand the usefulness of places where everyone looks down at their own socks. She wore a hoodie and carried a cheap backpack. She did not smile until she had the drive in hand and had verified, on a small device, that it contained what I said it contained. Then she sighed once, like a person stepping into a long staircase. Okay, she said. We do this in layers. She explained her method with the practical patience of someone who has learned that outrage burns fast and evidence burns slow. First, verification. Second, redundancy. Third, legal anchoring. Fourth, publication with timing designed to prevent quiet cleanup. They will move when they feel watched, she said. So we watch them first, then we publish when their hands are full. Over the next 5 days, I watched Tamsin do the least cinematic work I have ever seen, and I have never respected anything more. She called port authorities and asked innocent questions. She requested public records. She cross-checked the barge registration and found it was leased through 3 shells, each more bland than the last. She interviewed a former Meridian Blue contractor who had quit after developing migraines and strange dreams during a project near coastal towers. She brought a marine acoustics professor into a windowless conference room and played the hum test through controlled equipment. The professor's face changed. This is not a generator, he said. This is patterned. Someone is doing something on purpose. He wrote 3 pages of notes, then asked for a copy of the audio. Tamsin shook her head. Not yet, she said. We control distribution until publication. If they know what we know, they adapt. She was not cruel. She was strategic. Strategy is compassion with a longer time horizon. By day 7, the story had a skeleton strong enough to carry weight. Tamsin had identified a trust that owned Meridian Blue and traced that trust to an investment group that publicly funded environmental initiatives while privately buying influence in telecom infrastructure. The tower on St. Leora was licensed as a research relay. The mesh cage was described, in one permit application, as temporary containment for invasive species. The permit application listed no minors on site. The school roster files from Inez's drive showed dozens of teenagers with volunteer hours logged at times that matched the midnight shipments. The mismatch was the point. A mismatch is a handle you can grab. Tamsin filed a complaint with a federal agency using language that made the complaint impossible to ignore. Potential human subjects research involving minors without consent. Potential unlawful restraint and coercion. Potential environmental violations in protected waters. She attached redacted evidence and, crucially, she made sure the complaint was copied to 3 oversight offices. Redundancy. Again. Someone somewhere would get curious, if only to avoid being blamed later. Then we waited, which felt like doing nothing, but was actually the tense work of resisting premature action. The island was still operating. If Inez was alive, she was still trapped inside a tightening net. I hated the waiting. Tamsin did not. She watched for movement. She tracked the barge via publicly accessible AIS data that flickered on and off like a nervous heartbeat. She watched charter flight logs. She watched social media for tourists posting from St. Leora and noticed a sudden absence of posts after a particular date. Silence on the internet can be more suspicious than noise. Lockdown, she murmured. They are scared. The publication day arrived like a door slamming. 3 outlets released coordinated stories within the same hour. A national investigative piece, a regional deep dive, and a legal analysis explainer that translated jargon into consequences. The headlines avoided the hum at first. They focused on minors, restraint, and covert shipping in restricted waters. That was deliberate. You lead with what people can understand. The hum came later, in a follow-up with expert commentary. The moment the stories went live, the Orchard reacted in predictable ways. Meridian Blue issued a statement calling the allegations baseless. Dr. Rowan Hale appeared in a polished video inside the institute, smiling beside coral tanks, claiming the mesh cage protected vulnerable species. He used the word safety 3 times. He never mentioned the teenagers. The absence was loud. Within 6 hours, a senator demanded an inquiry. Within 8 hours, a federal agency announced it was reviewing the allegations. Reviewing is bureaucratic language for, we have to do something because now everyone can see us. On the 2nd day after publication, a storm rolled in. It was not a cinematic hurricane, just a hard coastal system that made the sky look bruised. But it did the ocean's quiet work. It mixed. It scattered. It interfered. The barge left St. Leora early, and in the scramble to move crates, someone made an error. A worker posted a photo to a private group chat, complaining about overtime, and the photo leaked. In the corner of the photo was a crate with a serial number that matched the ledger. That single match turned the story from allegation into corroboration. Corroboration is a lever. Tamsin smiled for the first time in days. They are bleeding, she said. Authorities finally acted on day 4, but not in the heroic way Inez warned against. There were no helicopters in the first wave. There were auditors, inspectors, officials with clipboards who asked boring questions and demanded access to records. Meridian Blue tried to stall. Stalling is a confession made with time. Then, when stalling failed, there were warrants. The warrants were the real storm. The Orchard's power relied on private enforcement and on the assumption that no outside institution would apply its own procedures. When procedures arrived, the Orchard's masks began to crack. Cameras captured officials boarding the institute pier. Dr. Hale was filmed arguing, then forced to step aside. People cheered online. Cheering is not justice, but it can keep pressure steady while justice slowly lumbers into place. I wish I could write that Inez walked into daylight and hugged her mother on camera. That is not what the early reports said. The early reports said, several minors recovered, several adults detained, investigation ongoing, staff unaccounted for. Unaccounted for is the phrase that makes my stomach turn. It is also the phrase that suggests Inez was right. Systems move their people like inventory. The first wave of searches found the tower servers wiped, but redundancy had already beaten wiping. The drive in the jar was the missing piece they could not claw back. It existed outside their control. That is why the story did not die when the servers went blank. 2 weeks later, Tamsin received an envelope without a return address. Inside was a torn piece of Institute stationery, with 3 words written in careful block letters. Triangle still points. On the back was a rough sketch of a coastline and a circle around a cove south of the main island. No name. No explanation. Tamsin looked at me and said, "We do not go there." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were raw. "We give it to the investigators." She handed the note to a federal agent at a briefing and watched his face harden. The agent asked, "Who sent this?" Tamsin shrugged. "Someone who wants to live," she said. That answer was true even if the sender was not Inez. Wanting to live is a motive that does not require identity. Months passed. The story became hearings. Hearings became lawsuits. Lawsuits became settlements and indictments. Dr. Hale pleaded ignorance until internal emails contradicted him. Mr. Voss turned state's evidence and tried to paint himself as a small cog, until the volunteer rosters and the audio logs showed he was not small. Meridian Blue attempted to dissolve. The trust attempted to pivot into another brand. The investment group issued statements about ethics. Ethics statements are perfume on rot, but the paper trail was thick. It had dates and signatures. That is what makes rich people lose sleep. Signatures. A signature is a promise you cannot later call a misunderstanding. As for the hum, scientists argued publicly about what it did. Some called it an acoustic manipulation technique designed to induce compliance states. Some called it a neurological entrainment experiment. Some warned that playing the audio widely could be harmful, and they were right to warn. The investigation treated it like hazardous material. The public treated it like a mystery. The orchard had always relied on mystique, the feeling that something was too complicated to challenge. Tamsin refused mystique. She kept returning to the same simple point. Miners were used without consent. People were restrained. Shipments were hidden. Profits were extracted. Complexity does not excuse cruelty. That line, repeated, became the spine of every article and every court filing. I never found out, with certainty, what happened to Inez Calder. That uncertainty became a bruise in my mind. But I learned something from watching Tamsin work. Certainty is not always required to act ethically. You do not need perfect knowledge of an individual's fate to know a system is wrong. The jar was proof enough. And still, one morning, almost a year after I found the jar, another jar appeared on the same beach. This one was smaller, the glass thicker, the seal professional. Inside was a slip of paper that contained only a triangle and a set of coordinates and a date. No drive, no story, just a direction. Tamsin read it and said very softly, "Someone is alive." She did not smile. Hope can be a trap, but it can also be a compass if you treat it like a tool and not like a drug. We did not go alone. We did not go at all, not directly. We passed the coordinates to the legal team, and the investigators, and the Coast Guard. And then we waited again. Because waiting, when chosen, is different from waiting, when imposed. 2 days after the date on the slip, a search team entered the circled cove under warrant. The official report later said they found a small maintenance bunker, used for equipment storage. Inside were supplies, a sleeping bag, a first aid kit, and a map of shipping routes with certain lines marked in red. There was also a name written on the wall in pencil. Neela. Under it, a triangle. Under that, a sentence. Leaks move like tides. The report did not say who wrote it. The report did not say whether they found anyone. But the paper trail expanded again, and the investigation widened to include other coastal sites, other towers, other shells. A single jar had become a pattern, and patterns are harder to dismiss as isolated incidents. I am writing this addendum because Inez asked for boring persistence, and because stories about villains become entertainment when they end with a single arrest. The orchard was never one island. It was a method. St. Leora was a pilot, a test bed, a sanctuary-shaped trap. When it was exposed, the method attempted to relocate. That relocation is still happening somewhere as you read. This is not despair. It is instruction. The only stable defense against a method is a culture that recognizes the method. That means you, finder, reader, citizen, whatever name you wear. When you see a brochure that looks too clean, ask who profits. When you see safety used to justify secrecy, ask who is being counted. When you see a research initiative with a restricted buoy, ask why. Ask boring questions until someone answers, or until their refusal becomes evidence. If you want to honor Inez, Do not romanticize her suffering. Do not turn her into a poster. Turn her into a process. Support reporters who do tedious work. Support legal clinics that file boring motions. Support whistleblowers with funds and housing and privacy. Teach teenagers that volunteering is not always harmless. Teach adults that paperwork is a weapon when used by the powerless. And if you ever find yourself on a beach after a storm and you see glass in the rack line, pick it up. Not because you want drama, but because you have learned, like I have, that the sea sometimes delivers the only evidence that is free. Epilogue. There is a temptation, after a scandal becomes public, to believe the work is finished, because the villain has a name and a face. But the orchard taught me that names are replaceable and methods are portable. That is why I keep the first jar on my desk, empty now, cleaned of salt, a simple cylinder of glass that once carried a drive and a letter and a stubborn instruction. When I feel tired of paperwork and headlines, I turn the jar in my hands and remember what Inez wrote. Silence is not safety. It is only delay. Delay is what powerful people buy with money, and it is what ordinary people can steal back with persistence. I do not know if Inez is alive somewhere under a different name, or if Neela ever saw her brother again, or if Lark learned to sleep without waking to a hum. I only know that the story did not stay on the island. It moved. It leaked. And because it leaked, a method became visible. And visibility is the first step toward refusing to be counted like birds. If you are reading this long after the hearings and settlements, if St. Leora has already been rebranded into a different brochure, keep one habit anyway. Whenever someone tells you a boundary is for your safety, ask who built the boundary, who holds the keys, and what ships pass in the night while you are told to stay calm. That question, repeated, is a tide that never stops.